So trying something new and reading a bedtime story for adults to support mental health and general well-being, general sense of well-being, safety and connection. Also reflecting on the total pointlessness of COP26, which I haven't followed because it's just pointless. Blah blah blah. Okay. The Last Tree by Nicola Baxter. Once upon a time, there was an island covered with trees. They grew so thickly that their branches met overhead. No light from the sun could filter down to the forest floor, so nothing grew there. And as nothing grew except trees, there was also nothing for most small animals and insects to eat. Only a few creatures survived in the topmost branches of the trees, where the sunlight dappled the glossy green leaves. One day, a scientist came to the island. He examined the trees and the living things that shared the island with them. Then he sent in his report to the ruler of the country that owned the island. The scientist reported that trees had overrun the island, destroying other plant life and severely restricting the wildlife that could survive there. He advised that exactly half of the trees should be cut down. This would allow light to reach the forest floor. Gradually, other species would begin to thrive again on the island. The ruler to whom the report was sent hesitated. He formed several committees to discuss the matter. He set up a special inquiry to look at other parts of the world where similar actions had been taken. He asked another scientist to prepare his own report, to check the findings of the first scientist. At last, the ruler found that the advice he was receiving from everyone was overwhelming. He ordered that half the trees on the island should be cut down. It took a long while for the work to be carried out. There was nowhere on the island that the woodcutters could so much as pitch a tent, so they had to travel to the island each day in a boat. They had only a few hours to work before the boat returned to take them back home to the mainland before nightfall. When the woodcutters had finished their work, all the fallen trees had to be removed. Once again, committees, special inquiries, and 2 scientists suggested suitable methods. In the end, it was a small boy who had been reading his sister's encyclopedia who offered the solution. The trees were pushed into the sea and floated on the tide to the mainland. For several years, no one visited the island. The plan was to leave it undisturbed to see what new kinds of plants and animals would begin to live there. Finally, after 7 years, the original scientist returned to the island. It was a terrible disappointment. Instead of leaving space for new plants to grow, the felling of the trees had given the remaining trees extra space to grow taller themselves. Their branches grew longer until they touched each other overhead. Just as before, not a single ray of sunlight reached the forest floor. Only the creatures that had survived before the trees were cut down still lived on the island, high in the branches. The ruler demanded that new studies and new committees should be set up. Another plan was needed for the island. It didn't seem to occur to anyone that the island could simply be left alone. This time, the advice was more sweeping. All the trees must be cut down to enable other living things to grow on the island. After the usual committees and inquiries, the plan was carried out. Once again, it was a mammoth task. In fact, this time, the trees were bigger and more difficult to fell. When every single tree was cut down, they were floated away to the nearby mainland as before. Another 7 years passed before a study was carried out. This time, 2 scientists visited the island together. As they approached it in their boat, they peered at the horizon, looking for signs of life. A fuzz of green over the island, perhaps, or the beating of wings as a flock of birds rose up at their approach. But they found nothing. That's right. There were no trees, no birds, no insects, no plants, no animals. There were no living things on the island at all. It was dead. The scientists spent 2 days searching for even the tiniest sign of life. Finally, they were forced to admit that even seaweed did not grow on the rocks around the shore. Something had plainly gone wrong. The ruler set up a committee, as usual, to find out where mistakes had been made. On the last day of the inquiry, a very important witness came to give his opinion. This old man was well known as a world authority on islands and living things that make their homes on them. He was rather frail now, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Everyone waited with interest for his views. "Is it a fact," he was asked, "that no living things now survive on this island?" "Yes, that is true," he replied. "And is it a fact that there are no living things able to survive on the island?" "No," he said, "that is not so." "So what are these creatures or plants that could do well on so barren a piece of ground?" The old man looked around at everyone in the room. "Why, trees," he said. Good night.